we'll make a quick start with just having a quick talk about the tools. With the not maybe with the secateurs, but there's two types of blades for pruners. There's that, I don't remember the name of that one, but you can see it compresses on an anvil. I think it's called an anvil type. Okay, compresses on an anvil. And then you've got this type, which is called a parrot beak. Okay, the parrot beak is superior over the anvil size, only because this one here on the compression side here, it tends to bruise the wood and cause more damage to the wood. And breaks the bark on the other side and stuff like that. It's not a cleaner cut.
For deadwood.
Okay, so well, you can use it for deadwood, whatever, but my preference, if you're looking for tools, go for the parrot beak style. Money talks with this sort of stuff, because when you start buying the cheap stuff, the problem that happens is that you can get a branch that's bigger than the physics of the handles and stuff like that. Okay, especially if it's a piece of apple or something like that that's actually dead. When a piece of wood is dead and it seasons on the tree like that, it will be a heck of a lot harder than a green piece of wood. Okay, and you try and max these pruners out on a piece of wood like that, you'll actually snap your pruners or bend them or damage them in a serious way. So do be aware that with your tools, you know, sometimes that quality, it's a false economy when you're going for the cheapest, unless you've got the experience, and you can certainly have that with time to know, you know, that I'm going to break them. Same with the secateurs. You buy your cheap secateurs and stuff like that, you start snapping them in certain places because you've got such a big mouth, and the physics of that, especially with a big strong hand, you'll tend to snap your secateurs out. So do be aware of all of that, and don't be lazy. And if it's a big branch, don't try and do it with these, but come to these. If it is a big branch, there are techniques. You can get the branch, and if you bend it, what that does is it opens it up as it cuts, reduces the friction on the blade, and enables you to cut bigger branches, putting less force and hopefully not breaking them and stuff like that. So you bend it, and as you cut, and it opens up the wound, if you can imagine that. Rather than just leaving it there and cutting it, this here gets binding. It binds in the cut when it's a really big cut, and stuff like that. So yeah, just be aware with the tools, especially the cheaper stuff. They are easy to break if you've got big strong hands. Anyway, the saws, there's a whole range of saws. These things here, you've got your top of the range, you've got silky. This isn't a silky saw. Silky saws are 40-50 quid for a silky saw. These were mid-range. These were about £30 each. This one here is Oregon. That's a well-recognised brand for chainsaws and stuff like that. I actually like this one mainly as a climber. It's designed for climbers. It's got a lock in there so that when you're swinging around up a tree, it doesn't fall out and end up on the ground when you push it in there. And it's got this little turntable thing here which stops you as you slide it in and out from damaging that. So you can see that this saw here, even at 30 quid, a lot more thought has gone into this saw than some of these other ones with going in and out. You'll start cutting down here, you know what I mean? They are just so sharp and so vicious. Okay, so yeah, the Oregon, if you're looking for a saw, I recommend the Oregon. Saving money but still getting a well thought out saw and stuff like that for pruning and stuff like that. These saws, they cut on the pull, not on the push. It's a Japanese design, okay, where the British saws and all of that sort of stuff cut on the push. These cut on the pull. You can tell by the direction of the teeth and stuff like that, and the way they are designed. Yeah, so remember that you're not trying to cut that way and put the pressure that way. You pull with the pressure, then go forward, pull with the pressure and stuff like that. On these saws, do be aware these saws are vicious. They will really cut into you and make a mess of you so easily. So have a lot of respect. Never ever cut towards yourself. Same with the kitchen knives at home and stuff like that. If there's a slip, it can be messy. Any questions about the tools and stuff like that?
No.
Okay, well, we'll go and head over to the trees. If you want to grab yourself a pair of loppers, we've got this. What I was going to say about this saw here. These saws here. Okay, these saws here. These actually were on eBay, and they were like £6 each versus you know, sorry, these ones here, these ones were like 30, and the silkies are 40. And I've used this saw, and it's totally sufficient. No, it's absolutely great. This thing, it's still very, very vicious. You can't, because of these sections that they've cut out of here, you can't cut the smaller stuff. It binds in the big gap that you've got there. It's not so good for that. But on a big cut, these things here are still, you know, I was surprised at the quality when you consider you can get like 6 of these for a silky saw or something like that, or 7 of these for a silky saw. Okay. Another few tips. If you can see one that's got a lot of colour in it, well, ones like this, you know what I mean? Don't go for dark black ones and black handled things and like that, because when you're working in rough areas, you put it down, you pick up your loppers, and you can really easily lose them. So, you know, things of having a nice little tips, having a nice bright handle or something like that is great for finding it again. I bought these ones specifically because they've got a belt pouch so you can keep them on you. I bought these just to see the quality difference and see whether they were suitable for some aspects when you've got a lot of people and stuff like that, and loss and people losing them and stuff like that. But yeah, I was pleasantly. It's like £6. That's including postage. I don't know how they make stuff for these prices. With these saws, the tip of your saw is kind of, I'm asking you to try and take care of the tip of your saw. It's the most abused part of a saw. Okay, and that's mainly because when you're cutting things in the ground, it hits the ground, you get soil in there, and then you cut, that soil goes into the cut, excess emery paper, wrecks the tip of your saw. Okay, very, very quickly. So be aware of the tip of your saw, take care of it, because sometimes you're getting into nooks and crannies, and the only bit that will reach is the tip of your saw. Okay, and if it's a big branch and it's only the tip of the saw in there, you'll be there for a long time cursing it because you've wrecked it, getting dirt and grit in the ground and stuff like that. So yeah, that's when you're cutting things off at ground level. Another thing to be aware of, in older cuts or dead wood or stuff like that, you get a lot of moss and you get a lot of stuff growing in there and things like that, and it catches a lot of bird poo, and there's a lot of grit in bird poo. Okay, so those sort of situations can really, you know, a couple of cuts through that sort of material can totally take the edge off your saw. Okay, it's years of dust, dirt, bird poo, weed seeds growing. If you see a section like that, stay away from it with your saw. Take care of your saw, especially if it's costing you 50 quid. You go through something like that and you've lost 30% just in one cut of the edge of your saw. And when you really have to do thick stuff, you know, it makes a real big difference to getting through the work and you know, that sort of stuff.
Richard,
yes.
sorry, are any of these blades replaceable?
The Oregon, they're all replaceable, but it's like 20 quid to replace the blade versus 30 quid for a new one. But I know that one's replaceable. The Oregon certainly is, I saw that. But they all do have bolts and nuts on it. They are replaceable, yeah. Silky saws are replaceable.
Yeah.
This one's nice, it has a clip that has a clip as well, for taking it on and off. Yeah. But it is a lot of money, you know, for these good saws, but if you're serious about your pruning, it is worth spending it. And like I said again, really take care of your saw.
What we've tended to find is our volunteers might use an inappropriate, say, secateurs first, instead of using something wider for a larger piece. And then these, they manage to twist,
They've twisted
and then
it,
they're knackered as well.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a common thing that I've noticed.
A common thing that people do with these sorts of things is cut garden wire. Okay,
Well,
don't they?
I've done that.
Well,
I've done that.
Okay, appropriate job for the right job. Don't ever cut any kind of wire, no matter how small, with these kinds of tools. Okay, they're not hard enough, and you take notches out of your blade, noticeable notches. You go and have a look, and you can see the notches out of the blades with people cutting garden wire and stuff like that. Okay, just again, right, and it's like it's so far to go and get the right tool, and I've got that. Yeah, it'll cut it. Do the job, not a problem. But it wrecks your blade. It really chews into it, and it becomes a saw blade instead of a nice sharp cutting blade. Okay.
Are they replaceable, these blades on the secateurs?
The good ones probably, yeah.
Some of them are,
the good brands, definitely they would be. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Designed for that. and they should be able to take them off and sharpen them. Okay, take the blades off and sharpen them is certainly, they need that as part of the maintenance. It makes a big difference having a nice sharp blade, getting through the cut, also the less damage to the tree and stuff like that. Okay, that's an anvil type. I wouldn't, yeah, I don't know how. We might take the box over, you might have to change and chop and find one that works very well and stuff like that. With the pruning of these trees over here, there's so many different types of pruning techniques, you know, for what you want to achieve in that garden. Like over in the Braes, we don't want to reduce the size of the trees. We want the trees to grow really big and form a canopy, and that canopy is going to suppress the blackberries and other seedlings and stuff, because it's very low maintenance. Over here you're mowing in between the rows, over there you've got succession, you've got other trees and tree species that want to come up that are going to compete and growing in the orchard. When we get a canopy that will cover, it will suppress all of that and make access underneath the orchard so much easier in a wild orchard and stuff like that. We're here, it's a bit different. We want to keep some space so the light comes in between the rows, and sort of we've got light for the raspberries and stuff like that. So we've got different types of pruning techniques for the different areas. I think over here, maybe when you're pruning today, concentrate on reducing the number of fruit spurs on the trees here so that we can double the size of the fruit. Doubling the size of the fruit, obviously it's obvious what happens with that. You know, in the picking, it takes half the time to pick the tree rather than picking little tiny bullets. When you're chopping them up for juicing, it takes half the time to chop them up. So we can cut down the work here, okay, massively by reducing. I've seen some of the spurs are like 2 foot long, and there's just so much fruit on these that's you know, sort of a big plus I want to concentrate on today over with these trees. So we've got apples, pears, plums, a whole lot over here. If you've got a tree that's difficult, you want some questions, come and pull me over the place. There's a fountain of knowledge in here, and at different situations different things will come out. In regards to the time of pruning, as a tree surgeon, we prune all year round. Okay, there are sections where we will not prune in the spring. Okay, certain trees and stuff like that, because the sap's flowing, and that's the most detrimental time to prune a tree. And when you cut it, the tree will bleed a lot. That's really detrimental to the loss of energy to the tree, and also pests and diseases that can get started due to the continual wetness. These bacteria and viruses and all of these things, one of the key ingredients they need to germinate and to spread is moisture. Okay, so if you've got things like silverleaf, black spot, canker, and all these sort of things that are in your orchard, the worst time you can prune is when it's wet, damp, and a high humidity, and a very high relative humidity. Okay, because they need to germinate and get into that piece of tissue before it dries. Once it dries, they need the water as that medium, as a transfer method to germinate and to grow and get through, whether it's the stomata and the leaves and these sorts of things. I think with stone fruit pruning, the preferred method to prune is in the summer, late summer, when you've got the leaves on it. I think that's primarily for silverleaf. Silverleaf is a very, very detrimental disease to stone fruit, and it's not an easy control. I'm not sure. When I was studying stuff, we had something called trichodowel, and to control it, you actually had to drill into the tree, and you'd hammer these dowels, which had an impregnated substance in the dowels, and you would hammer that into the tree. And I don't think it eradicated the silverleaf. It was a management. These are for high amenity value trees in parks and stuff like that, trying to manage the silverleaf. But if you have lost all of the leaves, there's no way you will know that that tree has silverleaf unless you know those trees intimately and you work there all the time. Okay, so on other orchards and stuff like that, they do it in the summer so you can see if you've got silverleaf, because once you start cutting silverleaf, then you go and make all these other cuts, you're spreading it to all these other trees. Okay, a common one you'll see is the Lawson cypress, that tree over there, and you see the dead hole in it and stuff like that. You get a sort of a fire bite. I don't know the exact name of it, but it's a bacterial blight that gets into them. You go and prune a Lawson cypress with a hedge trimmer when there's a lot of rain and it's really damp, you're going to spread it everywhere, all over the show. So it's best to do that when it's windy, dry and hot, and then to do your hedge trimming if you know you've got that on your Lawson cypresses, to reduce the massive spread. And when it's bad, you'll destroy a hedge pruning it at the best time for it to spread and stuff like that. Okay, so things to be aware of there. We've got fastigiate trees in here. Fastigiate means it's very upright and erect, so we have different pruning techniques for that. That'll be your pears that are very fastigiate. And well, there's everything else. So when you're making a cut, you should always have a reason to take that cut, okay? If you're not sure, don't worry about it. There's not a lot of wrong you can do unless you sort of, all of these stubby little branches, I'm going to take those off. Well, actually, those are fruiting spurs, and you've not been taught what a fruiting spur is, and you're taking off all the fruit, which does happen. People looking for what they think is a weak branch, they go, oh, it's stunted and it's stubby, doesn't look right, not like the other branches, I'll take that off, and they're taking off all the fruit. And stuff like that. So I'll show you, apples can be tip bearing without fruiting spurs, and it can be spur bearing as well on the apples and things like that. So we'll go over and we'll have a look at some of the trees now. Let's talk about the morphology of a tree and how it defends itself. Okay, trees are not like humans at all. I mean, that's obvious, but I'm talking about in the tissue form. They don't heal. The only part of a tree that will heal is the cambium. You damage the cambium, it will graft back together, okay? But when you go into the wood, the sapwood and the heartwood of a tree, once you cut it or it gets a disease in it, okay, the tree doesn't eradicate it. Its defense system is called compartmentalization, okay? So what it does is it compartmentalizes, it puts a fence. Has anybody seen spalted beech? Do you know what I mean by spalted beech? You see these black lines? Okay, that's where two species of actual fungus and bacteria, they've met in the tree, okay? But it can also be a line where the tree has met it and it's put the tannins into the wood and put a barrier to try and contain it, okay? So it's compartmentalizes and it's got different zones. It's got the annual growth rings, okay? It's got something called medullary rays. You see in oak wood, you see those flecks, those sort of floating flecks in oak wood? Okay, those are medullary rays, and a medullary ray is a typical zone for compartmentalization. So when a disease gets into the tree, it tries to put a fence around it. That's how it defends itself. That's the method for the trees. It does have tannins, it can inject tannins in and stuff like that, but generally a disease is compartmentalized and controlled within the tree. But when you also damage a tree, that damage, you've got canker here and stuff like that. When kids go and use an axe on a tree, that damages that wood will be there for the life of the tree, okay? And the only thing is the cambium will grow around it and then compartmentalize it and try and stop disease from getting into it. The tree itself has something around each branch butt that goes into a stem, and it's called the bark branch ridge, okay? The bark branch ridge is designed to stop infection moving down a damaged stem or a diseased stem into the next branch, okay? So when we're pruning, we don't prune, that's a dead branch, I'm just going to see that. You don't leave stubs like this, okay, for most of the time, unless you're taking suckers up above, okay? But what you prune to is you're always cutting back. This tree, it's full, this is your fruiting spur, okay? So we've got fruiting spurs all over this tree. It's so full of fruiting spurs, I can guarantee that the fruit on this is probably going to be quite small and quite tiny. So we're going to go in here and we're going to reduce maybe even by 50% these fruiting spurs, which will double the size of the fruit, okay? But when you're cutting, you don't cut it back to a stub like this, okay? When you prune back to a stub like this, what you get is there's no buds around that. You get adventitious shoots that will come up there. It's called witch's brooming. It looks very, very unnatural in an amenity tree, in an amenity situation, okay? And you get multiple stems, and it creates a lot of work that you've got to keep pruning back to it. When you take it back to the bark branch ridge or to another branch cutting off like that, you're going to get less adventitious shoots out there, less regrowth, sometimes no regrowth, okay? And it's for the amenity pruning of the tree. That's the best technique. When you've got big suckers, see this sort of stuff up here, when you get these sort of growths and you're pruning those back, you can just take it back to a couple of, it's called spur pruning, you just take it back to, I'm going to leave that because it's coming out here, that's still fine, but see somebody's done it up here, and you can cut it back to a couple of buds, and just leave a couple of buds. That's just to reduce the height. On ones like, see that big one over there, look at that, that's a big plum over there, see those huge big long branches, okay? So we'll take those down to reduce the tree size and that. So the idea of the bark branch ridges is it swells, when you cut back to it, it swells and closes over the wound. If you leave a stub, okay, it can't swell and close over that wound, Okay, so it's the most powerful defensive mechanism a tree has for protection of disease and stuff like that. It will grow over, cover over that wound, seal it off, compartmentalise that in there, and put tannins into the base of that wound there to stop the disease that's in that from moving into this trunk here. Okay, and when you start leaving stubs like that, the bark branch ridge can't do its job properly. You end up with a wound that gets rotted, and there's much more of a chance of disease getting started in there and moving into the tree.
So basically you got to cut.
Yeah,
Right
we're
back.
pruning back down to here, okay?
Right.
Like that, and this is the bark branch ridge around here. Some trees it's really obvious, and it's like a donut around the base of a tree. Some trees it's not, you can't see it at all, but just be aware, you can see it there, that swollen bit at the base of that spur, that swollen bit around there. It's quite obvious. You can see there's actually a clear line where you'd prune that to, the top of the bark branch ridge. Okay, you'd prune it off there. Okay, that's, when you can't see it, you just imagine that zone around that and you prune to the top of that bark branch ridge. There are many types of pruning form techniques for a tree, okay, whether it's a central leader or the old Victorian vase. Modern types of pruning techniques are all for a central leader system, and then they have multiple tiers. So you have a tier growing out there and a tier growing out there, then it will go up and then you'll have another tier like that, and you'll have 3 to 4 tiers. And they'll keep it at about 4 tiers, I don't think it'd have 5, about 4 tiers. That's designed primarily for spray penetration. If you can imagine a sort of a wall there and a one coming out here, the sprayer, when it goes past, okay, has good penetration to the whole tree. When you have a vase system like that, okay, you've got a shield to the inner side of the tree, okay, and it doesn't get as good a spray penetration. So it's not the preferred method. But here, due to wanting to keep a lot of fruit low to the ground, okay, and stuff like that, and especially when you want a canopy to cover and suppress growth down on the braes and stuff like, we're encouraging a vase technique here. And by doing that, we cut out everything in the centre of the tree, encouraging the light to get to the base, which means it keeps the fruit, and we get more fruit lower down on the tree, less fruit higher up. Okay, so it's more within reach by having a vase style here, especially on the braes where we don't want to take ladders and all of this sort of stuff. And that means taking out sometimes some big formative cuts on some of these trees.
Cut out that one.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
You know, I'd just reduce all of the, it's getting plenty of light, you've got a big hole in the centre of this tree here, you know, so for this tree, all I would do on this one, I'd probably try and take off half of the spur wood, you know what I mean, like this, okay, you can see that, reducing all of these, and that's all spur wood. And all trees, there's a spectrum of how it wants to grow. Sometimes it's great big water suckers like that plum over there. This tree has none of that, so this is sort of, this tree's going to go very, very slowly. So you don't want to reduce this tree back out of this whole tree. That's the only one nice big healthy water shoot. Okay, so this tree is not going to spread a lot. So we really don't want to prune stuff off like this on this tree. We want to leave it and help the tree get bigger and bigger and stuff like that. But then
What's the rootstock on this one?
I don't know. I'll get onto rootstock. It's a good question about rootstock. What is rootstock? Why do we have rootstock? What's it used for? There are multiple uses for rootstock. Within the industry, there are diseases which are really bad for the apple trees and stuff like that. And so the main reasons for grafting a scion onto the rootstock is, number one, you can't grow them from seed because they'll never be true to type. So you have to get some of the parent wood and graft that to make sure it's true to type for that to all to be the same, exactly the same apple. It may be a great taster, great shelf life, great looker and all of that sort of stuff, but it may be really, really weak for diseases, okay? Things like that. It may be poor in heavy soils, maybe no good in chalk soils. Okay, so rootstocks have got all of these traits that they're grown and they're bred for. Disease resistance, okay? It could be the soil type, so it's good in clay heavy soils, this rootstock. And you've also got things like dwarfing, reasons for keeping the tree small, okay? So it's less, the growth is less strong for amenity purpose in the town and stuff like that. And you can still get a dwarfing rootstock, but eventually that tree will still grow huge. I've been in arboretums where a dwarf conifer is 40 foot high. Okay, okay? And you go and buy the certificate for that tree and it says it'll grow to 3 meters. They will keep growing and keep going, you know, and these trees are 100-year-old dwarf conifer, 30, 40 foot. Okay, so take the size of a tree with a grain of salt. Oh, it's going to grow to 3 meters and then stop. No, okay. But yeah, so I don't know what all of these rootstocks are and stuff like that. But a big thing to be aware of is that sometimes you can get suckers from the rootstock, and recognizing a rootstock and how it looks differently from the cyanwood. Okay, especially in the winter, and you can notice that especially in the plums, it'll have big spikes and big spears. Okay, you know straight away, because you try and pick plums in that in a commercial, it's just dangerous, and people will be spearing themselves, and they can be, you know, up to 2 inches long, these spears, and really with a sharp tip on them.
So this
Okay.
originally is an Egremont russet, but we don't have what its actual rootstock.
Yeah. So these holes in the stems, that's a canker. Okay, so you've got apple canker. If you see an apple canker or see a spot that's got a bit of disease in it, don't cut through it with your secateurs or anything like that. Okay, cut either side of it, give it a good bit of space, because your next cuts after that, okay, you can spread it and stuff like that.
So you disinfect.
Well, you should, if you're going to cut through it, you know, you've got all of this with disinfecting, but it is really time consuming and stuff like that. And some trees you'll find around here are just full of black spot and apple canker and stuff like that. Okay,
And that's
fire
the
blight.
size of the fruit. So,
So it's more of a crab, is it?
well, no, it's supposed to be a russet.
A russet. Okay. Well, if it's tiny, let's take off
Even more.
even more. Okay.
Yeah, they were all very small in this.
Crab apples,
Yeah.
Almost like
That there, you can see it's 3/4 ring barked. Okay. So I may actually just cut that right off. There's only a little 10 mil at the back of that stem.
Yeah, I'm
okay.
inclined to just remove that
Yeah,
completely.
I'd totally remove that. I wouldn't cut down through that, but I'd leave a bit of a stub. I mean, it's not the best practice in the world, but I'm, you know, have to disinfect the blade otherwise. So and things like that.
Should we not just disinfect it as routine, just between
Yeah.
trees anyway, just to keep anything
Yeah,
passing between
you
them?
know, in my whole life of a tree surgeon, we never
Yeah,
bothered with that so much, because the tree's got its own defensive zones and stuff like that,
sure.
and just relying upon that. But if you want to go to that level, that's certainly a valid point and a valid thing to do.
That's one of the things normally I say to everybody, Richard.
Yeah.
Just to make them aware that how dangerous. So it's a bit of, not of a fear thing, but
Yeah,
clean your tools.
yeah.
Use alcohol.
There are some trees here, 10, 15, 20% of the tree, and you know, it's impractical to try and disinfect. You're disinfecting with every cut, and it's going to take you 10 times longer to prune that tree. You know, and so the trees have a natural resistance to it, and when you're seeing a tree that has it, and especially down in the braes, the trees aren't being pruned, so you know the disease spread is 10 times worse than it should be, because this is why you're pruning out all of the diseased wood and stuff like that. And if you're pruning back to the bark branch ridge all the time and stuff like that, it's not too much of an issue, okay, about spreading it and stuff like that. It's really bad, obviously, when it gets into a stem. This is the net result. But this is, you know, they've been in this for years, okay? It's been in a trunk for years. Right. Any other questions? I'm sure there's a lot more that can come out once you just trigger a memory or whatever. It's all in there.
Yeah.
Can you? So I'm coming from maybe a slightly different perspective. I guess with things like plums, it's just dead, diseased, damaged, and crossing branches,
Yeah. Well, okay. That's it. Rightio. Let's talk about.
as opposed to the others, which might be because they grow in a slightly different way.
We'll go and look at a tree let's have a look at a tree like this, and that's what I mean. Let's take off half the wood on that. Okay. So many spurs, so we're going to get 50% wood. Again, take off a whole lot of spurs there. We've got a branch that's crossing and hitting this one here. Okay, I'm going to do that to a spur. Rather than taking it back there, I still want it to produce nice big stems and stuff like that because it's generating a lot of energy. These branches generate a lot of the food for the fruit and stuff like that. And some trees, we showed these trees down here, they don't produce these stems like that. If I cut that back to there on that tree, then it might not ever produce another big water shoot like that. These trees, you can see, it's just not producing them. So you've got to have, there's a lot to think about sometimes. When the trees are producing lots of this kind of wood, you can actually prune it back to the spurs to reduce the amount of this wood. Okay, as you can see on that big one over there, let's try and get less of it. Okay, but on this one, we still want these to be growing and producing stuff. Maybe, I don't want to reduce the height on this one, but you can see, you know, if you got this big water shoots, you'd use the pruning saw, the pole loppers, and be pruning it to spurs, a couple of spurs. Generally, you prune back to 2 spurs and stuff like that with a pruning technique. You're looking for crossing branches that are rubbing on each other. When there's too many branches all together, okay, and it's really, really thick, then we'll thin out a lot of those branches. And don't be afraid you're going to make a wrong cut and stuff like that. Just
that one there, you would take that one off and leave the.
I'd reduce this one back a bit. Okay, I didn't do it to the two buds. I'm just leaving it to fill that space and it'll put some more out and things like that. But you can see on these ones, it's all about spur reduction. Okay, so we can double the size of the fruit. Okay. And then you go to another tree and you'll be pruning it totally different.
You take this off?
No, I'd leave that.
Yeah, so
I'd
you
still
leave
leave that.
these-
This tree is not
these
too
big
big.
colours, yeah.
Let's let it. This is a formative branch. You've got formative branches like that. Okay, so you let it keep going, and then you got the spurs off it. So that one can keep going up there with the spurs off it. You know what I mean?
Rather than fruit.
When it, sorry.
That's going to produce leaves. rather
Yeah,
than
well,
fruit.
it's still got spurs at the tip, but they're just tiny young spurs.
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
see them out there. Okay.
So are you going to use ladders with these to get to the
We've
higher
got
fruits?
we've got
Oh, you poles,
pole
I
saws,
see.
pole pruners here to prune the longer one.
No, to pick
Yeah,
the
but
fruits.
they've got some. You've got some ladders, haven't you?
Is that how
Yeah.
you fruit?
Yeah.
Prune, so
We
is that
don't
how you
want-
pick the fruit?
You know, a lot of the apple trees are very, very high, and we don't want them to get any higher because we can't.
We will. Some trees will bring down. Some trees will let them. They're still filling out the space that they're in.
What age are they, most of them?
They will be a minimum of 12 years,
Okay.
12, 13 years.
One thing in formative pruning to be aware of, if you see this here, when you get two branches that are more than 70 degrees, if I remember right, the angle between the two, it's like 70 degrees. It should have been pruned out when it was a lot younger. As this tree gets bigger and bigger, these two are pushing each other apart, and it splits down here, and you get a crack forming in here, and then you can get disease in there, and then this will rip out in the later life in the tree. Now, it's not a certainty, but it's you can see them touching there, and they will grow and push each other apart,
Yeah, that one is splitting, isn't it?
and you can see down in here it's not looking too healthy down in there, and then you can get a disease in there and have a big negative effect on the tree. So it's to be aware of that when trees are younger. Those branches have got a steep V to cut one of them off. Okay, when you start doing it at this age, you've got a bigger wound, and you're going to get a lot of suckers off that wound, and it's a lot more maintenance to be aware of that. So yeah, just I'll come around, and you've got questions and want help with a tree, you know what I mean, we'll all tackle it together, and I'll rove about. If you know your tree really, really well, and you're getting a big crop one year and a small crop the other, it's called biennial cropping, okay? Why it happens, there's multiple reasons why it happens like that, but basically it gets into a cycle, and it has too much fruit and it exhausts itself, and so the next season it only has a tiny amount of flower because it's exhausted, because it had too much fruit last year. Okay, and because that year it had very little fruit, it's got so much energy the next year it does a big crop again. Okay, this is called biennial cropping in your tree. So it's a second year cycle that's happening in fruit trees. To try and get the tree out of that, obviously you prune hard and you thin hard on a heavy year, and then on a light year you don't really prune or thin or anything like that. Okay, so you're trying to reduce that heavy croppage so it's got more energy for next year, and it may take a while to get the cycle balanced again. Okay, if you see that and you know you've got that in a particular tree. You may have a crop one year and then nothing the next. Okay, so okay, how do you identify a fruiting spur? Okay, and it's all to do with internodal length. If you look in here, you've got all these little buds, multiple buds, really close. Okay, that classifies it as a fruiting spur. When you look at a branch like this, you can see the internodal length are 2 inches apart or more. Okay, so that's what you call a water shoot in a normal growth there. Everything else, this tree is like 90%, 80% fruiting spurs, okay, and they're absolutely everywhere. So we, you know, got to be aware of that this tree is a spur fruiting tree, but some apple trees it'll be fruiting on the ends of the tip bearing on some apple trees. Okay. Yep.
Can I